Thanks, Jay, for those lovely words, and thanks to Kath and Andy, who's on his way here, hopefully, for the invitation to come back. Would you have some slides? Yep. I'm not sure I can match you on the speaking the Welsh. I can say Croeso i'r Cymru, so I think that one works. I learnt that in a bar from Lester Reid. Lester Reid, sorry, and that one stuck for quite a long time. And I've definitely failed in business and spectacularly, but maybe more so I've failed in education a lot. I'm continuing to fail in education, but because I'm actually quite good at failing, I always see that as an opportunity. So some of the things that I'm going to share with you in a moment, not this one, the other one. I don't see it there. Do you know where that is, Kath? I've got it on here, if that helps.
Yeah.
Yep. The things I'm going to share with you while we're doing that are the product of a lot of failure, okay? While we're setting this up, if you've got $1 in your pocket or at least a coin in your pocket and you're happy to turn it into potentially 80 or 90 pounds, can you stand up with that coin? If you've got a coin in your pocket, and Paul Hannon has decided to donate to anyone who doesn't have a coin, just come over and see Paul. only small return on investment. So if you've got a coin in your pocket, stand up. It'll be under university, come 2019. Yep. Lovely. Cool. Lovely, thank you.
There we are.
Okay. I'm feeling sorry already for the people who are still sitting down. If you've got a problem with gambling, that's not a problem at all. Even if you've got 10p in your pocket, I'd stand up with that coin. Wouldn't be a problem. So now, everyone needs to find a partner for this first stage. So everyone partner up. You've got to have a partner. Okay, so here's the first piece of instruction, and just follow through this. One of you is going to toss the coin, right? It's going to go up. The other person is going to call heads or tail. So just catch it, whatever you're going to do, let it go on the floor, whatever's easiest. As soon as one's won the coin costs, give your pound or your coin to the other person and then sit down. So all we'll have in a minute is the people who win this coin toss will have the other person's coin, and we'll have half of you standing up, all right? So toss the coin and let's see what we get. Okay, so half of you sitting down. Okay, everyone partner up again. Everybody needs a partner, new partner. The people who've won need to find a new partner from the people who've won. You ready? Let's toss the coin again. Here you go. Yep. If you've won, you should have £4 in your hand now, or thereabouts, 4 coins. Yeah. Everybody who's still standing, come up to the front. Everyone should have £4-ish, or 4 coins. So partner up. What have we got? So, has everyone got a partner? Partner up. 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2. You guys are a partner, pair. Yep. You're a pair. You're a pair. Yep. Yep. And you're still coming. Yep. You're right. Hello. How are you? Okay. So you get. You partner up here. Anyone else coming? We're all done. Quickly, because we've got to get this done by 11, guys. So, you're okay? 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. You get to come in. Come in with the camera. You can call here. You can call. One more. Oh, one more. Sorry. Do your toy toss, and then the winners will stay and the losers will disappear. Yeah. Just toss the coin. Yep. Losers are up. Tails, you're in. Take the money, you're in. Yeah. Winner stay. One winner. Yeah, don't worry about that. Just hand the money over. You lost. Okay, so take your toss. We've got 2. Okay, so we've got to look. We're going to get you to call because you're not tossing. That's not tossing. You toss and the ball. Until now. Right. You can count that up and tell us how much it is, but I'm thinking it's 68 pounds, just from a quick count. So that's not bad, is it? That's not bad. How about we do it again? This time we'll do it for 20 pounds per player. Who wants to play for 20 pounds per player? No one? We've got one problem gambler. So, a tenner. So here's your first lesson. First lesson for the day. Take this back to your meetings, take it back to your classes. Principle of affordable loss. Entrepreneurs limit risk by understanding what they can afford to lose at each step instead of seeking larger all or nothing opportunities. They choose goals and actions where there is upside, even if the downside ends up happening. Most of you are happy to lose $1, a pound, right? But not that keen to lose 20. Think about what you're asking your students to do. If you're asking them to do something where they potentially see psychological loss, financial loss, or other forms of loss which are greater than they're willing to participate in, you're going to have your work cut out. If you can give them something to do where they're happy to engage and the loss isn't a problem for them, you'll have them there working with you, all right? So that's your first one, all right? I've got to catch up on time here, I think. Oh my gosh. How many of us? 35 pounds. How many? 35. You've been robbed. Obviously, there were a lot of people who thought they'd just play with the 10p, right? All I would say to you is shame on you all. Having said that, I did invite you to play with 10p. So anyway, look, it's better than nothing, isn't it? Huh? Exactly. Hands up, how many of you guys do some form of experiential learning or are connected to experiential learning? So that's great, isn't it? That's the vast majority of us, right? That's the sort of the world we live in, right? What Kath has asked me to do in this presentation is give you a couple of things that you can take away. Normally I would come along and bore you with some sort of philosophical rant about, why we should think about something in a different way. So I'm just going to hopefully give you two things that you can take away to think about in terms of how to get our students to be more capable of some form of action in the future, all right? Whether that's entrepreneurial action or just some sort of standard agency. So the big challenge that we all have, if you look at this little chart, I'm not sure how well you can see it at the back, but we have this second step here, which assumes the students do something, they reflect, they generalise, and then they go off and apply. And that's fantastic in theory, but what we actually know in reality, and you might not be able to read it, I'll read it for you. The exercise of human agency consists in judgment and behaviour ordered by self-conscious reflection about what to think and do. So we're making a big assumption here that our students can reflect in such a way that they'll then be able to adjust their behaviour and think about what they're actually going to be doing going forward. And Doris argues that there's a nice corollary that sits with this, and that is the exercise of human agents requires accurate reflection. I'm happy to bet with you all that none of your students find accurate reflection an easy thing, as most of you most probably don't either. We're not born with a natural ability to reflect, and more often than not, our reflections stay at a very surface level, all right? So what I want to do is share with you how I get my students to become good at reflecting. It's not an easy process. There's no easy fix here. There's no magic bullet. This is really, really hard work, but when you get students into this space doing it, it's absolutely fantastic in terms of the breakthroughs they have. They're doing it, not doing it for me, of course, they're doing it for themselves. So it's worth noting that Dewey talked about the nature of experience in his book Education and Experience, and he talked about the fact that we can think about every experience leaves a residue that we carry forward. I'm presenting today and I'm influenced somehow by previous presenting processes that I've been with, and today we'll have a chance to influence future presentations that I might give. So our challenge is what we're doing with our students miseducative? That is, it's an experience that arrests or distorts their growth. Is it non-educative? So it's a neutral experience with no or positive negative impact. And I would argue, unfortunately, for a lot of our students, having an experience that doesn't have adequate reflection connected to it brings it back into that space of being non-educative. It was interesting, it was fun, but if the reflection isn't authentic and true, then it's not actually going to lead into that growth that we're trying to develop in the students. And then, of course, we have the educative experience, which is positive experience that promotes growth and learning, which is where we want all of our students to be. So and I've discussed this here before, I think even in this room. The thing that I'm trying to convince my students to get on board with is this notion of ceilings. One of the great things about being an academic is you can make up words. And given I can't spell very well, so it was really ironic that you actually then invent words. So this word ceilings is what I'm looking for my students to adopt, which is produced by the conversion of an awareness of their feelings into an understanding of their feelings, into a greater sense of identity and ultimately self-love. So when my students come in and work with me, I'm wanting them to love themselves. How many of your students, have a lot of problems with anxiety? Hands up for the anxiety. Yeah, all right. So this isn't just about entrepreneurship. This is actually about helping students to become learners in the first instance, because they can actually cope with and understand who they are as an individual, and they can be really comfortable with who they are and not compare themselves to everyone else in the room. So in order to do that, I've created this process of reflection, which is called a STEPS model. I will give Kath the videos that accompany this. They don't have my name plastered on them, so if it's a process you're interested in or you want to modify it, you can use the videos that I've developed, which will enable you to better understand it. This process is designed on Mesereau's transformational learning theory, so it's thinking about the 10 stages of what actually has to occur for somebody to move from that disconcerting dilemma all the way through to that sense of, I now understand how I can re-engage in a positive way. So I'm asking my students I give them, and this is a typical question that I might give my students, is to what extent do they recognise an entrepreneurial self in their everyday life? And that's them defining what entrepreneurship is. There's no theoretical terms here, but it might just be in terms of challenging the status quo or acting on their intentions or whatever it may be, however they decide that. And they go away and they reflect on that for about a week. And once they've finished reflecting, they then use these 7 supporting questions to complete the reflection. So we move them from, I am identifying something at the surface level. What have I learnt that's new about myself in relation to my entrepreneurial self? And then we're asking them to work their way through that in terms of why. Why is that something new about me? And I'll show you this mechanism in a minute, but there's a full step here. So in thinking about this, I've got to get them to come all the way down to here. If they reflect horizontally, which is very common for students to do, they'll float across the top here and they'll go nowhere. They'll stay on the surface. But I'm trying to get my students to continually ask about 5 times why, whatever that is they've learnt that's new, why is that new for them? Why does that matter? What assumptions underpin that? Why do they feel that way? And if they get down to this stage here, they'll be able to address the next question, which is how does that relate to their values? So who are they in the context of going through this process? And again, why is that? Why does that? Why is that? And then they can get down to the point of how is this confirmed or challenge their values? Then at that point, they can think about, well, how does any of that relate to past experiences? If I got down to here and the common theme is that I've discovered that I'm actually pretty stubborn, what's a life experience I had last week, last year, 5 years ago, where I could have got a different outcome by not being stubborn, right? And why is that the case? How does that relate to my appreciation of other people's thinking? How does it relate to new sources of information that I'm engaging with? And then stepping right back from it, the outcome of the whole process, what does this mean for them as a learner? And what strategies could they now employ to become a better learner? So it's about getting to the point where that metacognition is in play as a result of going very deep. And what essentially I'm asking the students to do is take a leap of faith. None of this is comfortable. This isn't something the students will walk around saying, oh, I've just had a class with Colin and it was so enjoyable. Nobody is saying that. This is really hard stuff. This is facing up to what's inside, the things that upset them, the things that scare them, but it's necessary to make the learning authentic and to match up the experience to a process of reflection which will enable them to deconstruct it and hopefully to reconstruct it and make new meaning out of that process. So I'm using this mechanism of why, which I'll show you in a minute, to enable them to explore who they are in these different contexts. What I want them to not do is stay over here and justify. So I don't want them to use the why to justify their perspective. I want it to purely explore their own thinking, feelings, assumptions, and I don't want them to use it to continue the previous sentence that they've written. I don't want them to use it to explain, and I don't want them to provide any clarification. I only want them to explore. So when the student completes this process for me, they know what it means to have horizontal reflection, which we don't want. They know what diagonal is, which is I'm encouraging them to, they're on the right track, but we need to get more vertical. And so as an example, if they've written down for themselves, well, I've decided I don't like reflecting. That's fine. They don't have to be enjoying this experience. So using the why, that might lead them to, because we would learn more if we just focused on the theory. So that's a very horizontal response using that why. That's nothing about them, right? That's just their opinion. They're just justifying. Alternatively, if they got down to because the process is difficult for me, well, now we're heading in the right direction, but we haven't got why it might be difficult. So it's diagonal. And so because I've never been comfortable sharing my inner thoughts with others. So that's cool. So now there'll be another why that goes on to that. Why haven't you been comfortable sharing your inner thoughts with others? And then another why and another why. And that's going to give us the depth in each step. So for each one of those questions, the student's going to have 5 additional attempts at trying to get the depth into their answer. So there's their surface level, and then it's why, and why, and why, and why. And the assessment I'm giving them back is your assessment, your work here is great in terms of depth. I'm only assessing depth. There's no subjective analysis from my perspective on what they're saying. I'm only giving them feedback on how much depth they could achieve. And they're using that depth. So 35 times, and the students themselves created that symbol, which is why is the mechanism to help them go vertically deep into that process of reflection. So that's the first thing that I wanted to share with you, because this is a very challenging thing. We talk about experiential learning. We say we have experiential learning, and from my own practice and from talking with people in lots of different contexts, there isn't actually an adequate process of reflection that enables the students to take that experience and to actually move it forward. Think about your own lives where you've had those life-changing moments. It's pretty much because, life's really floored you, right? You've really been sat on your ass and you're thinking to yourself, this isn't really what I expected. But you're so immobilised that you have no choice but to try and actually make sense of it. What we're trying to do with our students is sort of say, well, we can actually bring aspects of that introspection into your everyday life, if only you're prepared to be vulnerable and trust this environment and move through it. And the results are fantastic. Of my students, I would say 30% are really good at this. Another 30% are trying, but it's quite hard. They don't really want to let me in. 30% just hate it. Just absolutely hate it. So when I'll get my teaching evaluations in a couple of weeks, it'll say something like, I cannot believe QUT would allow a man like this to work in an institution like this. Right? So I never used to have that problem before, but I do have it now. I already know it's coming, so it's not the end of the world. But it is not an easy process for students. But the benefits of this process are amazing because it's emancipatory for the students. It frees them. The person who is their worst critic themselves can leave the room and they can fall in love with themselves and they can become their best friend. And, the number one determinant of entrepreneurial behaviour is confidence. So we've got students who are full of anxiety and who aren't confident. How would you expect them to go off and do anything entrepreneurial, right? There's a lot of working in with their own inner head and heart before we can actually move them further down the pathway. So there's that bit, okay? I think I'm going okay, Kath. The next thing I want to talk about, so there's two things I'm trying to do with my students, two primary things. One is get them to understand who they are and have a constant sense of self-awareness in that process. That's the first bit. And the reflection process enables that to happen. There's other methods of reflection, obviously, which I use, but that's mostly the simplest in one sense that everybody can understand the process. Doesn't mean they can do the process very easily, but they can understand it. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about was how to actually help students to make sense of complexity. This is not an easy thing. It's not easy for us and it's not easy for our students. And it's not like practicing entrepreneurs can do this. Otherwise, if they could do it, make sense of complexity, they wouldn't make mistakes, right? But entrepreneurs make mistakes all the time, right? So how is it we can try to help our students to at least make sense of the environments they're trying to enact and have an impact in? And so I start with this cockpit. When I flew over here a few days ago and next Saturday when I fly back, if there's a problem between Heathrow and Dubai and then Dubai and Brisbane, I would hope that the pilots have access to what information is required to make good decisions about those issues. And so we have that here in this cockpit. The cockpit is designed to ensure that the wind speeds, the outside conditions, are things of other planes, the control systems on the plane, whatever is required at the pilot's disposal is there, right? But we don't naturally have a cockpit that sits in front of us which gives us all of that information that we would need to make good decisions, all right? So the next process I'm going to share with you is designed to do exactly that. And the reason for that is if you think about what we're dealing with here, it would be nice to think that we're creating experts, right? Someone does a degree in law and they become relatively expert on law. They do engineering, they become relatively expert on the requirements of how to build a bridge and so on and so on. It's very hard to sort of say someone's done a degree in entrepreneurship or subjects and they've become an expert in entrepreneurship, right? especially if they haven't really stepped forward into that world and built up that experience. So we've got a challenge here where we've got complex problems and we've got minimal guidance that are going to accompany them. And so our working memory is hoping that it's got something in the long-term memory that it can pull through, all right? And in this particular case, lots of relevant facts, similar examples and experience which can be pulled through. Rapid retrieval helps deal with complexity. This is the perfect outcome, right? But for our students, they're in this world, and we, more often than not, are in this world too. And that is, we might have some instruction happening here. We hit where we're at, working memory, but we may not have many relevant facts, examples or experiences, and as such, there's very little to retrieve. And when we're in that situation, we're buggered. It's just our working memory trying to cope with it. We get confused pretty much quickly because there isn't something for them to draw on. So this second part that I want to share with you is how I'm helping the students to understand that problem of not having something to draw through that automatic processing. If you look at the agenda that the Kath and Nikki have put together today, you have no problems reading it because you already have a schema there for English. You just pull it straight through. You don't have to think, where's my English deciphering tool gone? It just gets pulled through straight away. But if we gave it to you in German, there might only be a couple of people in the room who can actually say, oh, I'm okay with that. I've got a schema for that too. Our students don't have schemas for making sense of the outside world. And no amount of theory is going to help them to have a schema for the outside world because it's unpredictable, it's complex, and they have to actually make sense of all of the different components and their weighting of importance on a time-by-time basis, all right? But we can help them to develop a schema which will enable them to deal with any degree of complexity. So let me walk you through the nature of that. The hardest part about this is that we can give them a sense of what the components are they'll have to deal with, but if you don't understand how those components interact with each other, then your working memory is just still going to be overloaded. So we've got to find a way of helping to take the working memory out of the equation so that there's something in the long-term memory there that can be pulled through and used in that situation. So the model that I've developed, I've been doing it now for quite some time, and the acronym that I use for it is pre-solve. It's an English word which most probably doesn't get used very often, but it simply means to solve beforehand. Could we just put our hands together and welcome Mr. Penaluna who's entered the room? It's nice to see you, Andy. Standing. So pre-solve relates to this framework, which you may have seen. I've had it in articles, books and in presentations with some of you before. And it's simply about helping students to understand, let me check my time, that whatever idea they've got, ultimately there's either an individual or a group resource profile that's in play. So who do they need to know to succeed? What do they need to know? And what resources would they need to access? And there's nothing controversial. All of these are very accepted components of the entrepreneurship literature. They're just put into a particular framework style. Do people understand what they're attempting to do? Do people approve what they're attempting to do? Do they understand how that space changes? This is maybe the greatest flaw that I see in students' thinking. They've not stopped to think, I want to go and do something fantastic, but I have no idea how other people have fared when they stepped into that space. Why did they succeed? Why did they fail? Right? If you don't know that, then you're really just rolling the dice, and hoping you're going to end up with the 35 pounds. I still can't believe that we're talking 35 pounds there. We may have to bring in a tax, like an exit tax on the way out of this room today, right? And I won't go through all the other elements here, other than to say that emoji, which Kath was talking to me about last night, because she knows I can't spell. So I think she was thinking, I think you got a typo in your slides there, Cole, but emoji is your ability to use someone else's energy to your advantage, okay? So it's an ecological term. The most common form of emoji is the sun that we have up in the sky now. It's the tides that are out there that are constantly providing a source of energy. If we went and built the tidal plant over here, if we found some money to actually make that happen, then we would be creating energy from the emoji. We can't own it, we can't control it, but because it's quite predictable, we could use it, right? And there are lots of forms of energy out there that our entrepreneurs can find to use to their advantage. So pre-solve essentially is everything that was in that model. Everything that was actually there is listed there. And the whole point of this is getting students to use this process. It creates 13 questions. So if the students know what that is, that's all they have to learn. I don't give my students anything else. For, let's say, a whole entire semester, they get that framework, that's it. To start with, they need to know what those terms are, then they need to know how those terms interrelate with each other, and then they need to be able to go and use it, and use it, and use it, and use it. This is the essence of cognitive load theory. We're trying to have a low cognitive load theory, so the students aren't being hammered with more and more theory being thrown at them. We're giving them something which they can get their heads around, and then we're giving them an opportunity to go and use it. And in using it in a way that helps them to understand how to make sense, they're developing an understanding of how they would encounter and work through the complexity that's in any given environment. Because they can ask the questions, okay, that's interesting for this idea. What do I need to know in order to succeed? Who do I need to know? Do people approve of what I do? How is the environment working to my advantage? How's it working against my advantage? What co-actions could be created? There's a series of 13 questions. The students go through it, and whenever they hit that complexity in their life, they pull it through as easily as what you would be doing in picking that up and reading it. It's just second nature. It comes through, and they can work through. Doesn't mean they can always have the perfect solution, but at least they are closer to knowing whether they should be acting or not acting. The aim of all of this, going nicely here and time-wise, we might end up with some question time. The aim of all of this is to create what I'm sort of leaning to is this notion of phronesis. So phronesis is what Aristotle was calling practical wisdom. So think about the outcome that you would like to achieve for your students, right? Is it a body of knowledge that they are going to know? Is it some confidence that they're going to develop? What about would it be if we said that as a result of being engaged in this process, whether it's, and I think in Wales you've got a really neat setup here where you could actually have something coordinated for happening in primary schools, into high schools, further education, higher education. You could actually have something. This isn't going to happen in one semester, right? So you could actually have yourselves working together because you can see that the possibility of that happening here for sure. But imagine if you actually said, what did the students get from this educational experience? And we said, well, they got the wisdom that enables them to locate a prudent course of action and resist their urgings of the passions and the deception of their senses. So they know what their cognitive biases are. We can't remove someone's cognitive biases, but we can make people aware of what the biases are. And if through that process of reflection that we spoke about before, they have that heightened level of self-awareness, so they actually know. Now, I know when I talk to you and anyone, if I give you a number, it's most probably I've doubled it, right? I'm a number exaggerator. Right, that's a bias I have. So if I tell you 50, it's most probably 25 or thereabouts. But I'm looking to bring your enthusiasm for around something, and so that number always ends up sort of just moving forward a little bit, right? But I don't always do it because I'm aware of it, and so that stops me from exaggerating. And now I quite often just give you the actual number, which really leaves you guys confused because you don't know whether I've given you the number or the double number. But that's okay, right? We all have an urging to do something. Maybe we're stubborn, maybe we're too optimistic. If our student understands those urgings and they also understand the potential source of their self-deception, and we all have that, right? It's not about is someone smarter than somebody. Sumner said, and I'm sure I actually said it here a few years ago, Sumner said that purpose doesn't equal consequence. Just because you want to doesn't mean you can, right? Otherwise, we would all be entrepreneurs out there doing amazing things. The challenge is, can you understand where the self-deception is actually being born from? What is it about your psyche that leads to that? So we would love an entire generation of students coming through our schools now who are facing a different world of work, who aren't going to be given 30 and 40-year careers at one organisation. We would love to think, and government would love to think, that these students would leave the institutions capable of what we would call self-negotiated action, being able to take control of their future by making sense of what's in front of them. If the students haven't learned how to reflect in a way that develops a constant process of self-awareness, and if students are continually overloaded with that working memory in terms of the complexity that they find, then it's simply not possible that whatever we do in entrepreneurship education and enterprise education can be effective at that individual level of the student. There'll always be an outlier. We say, wow, look at that student. They got $1 million funding and it's fantastic. And we can put a little poster up about that and we can say our program must be pretty good because look at that student, right? I was talking with Kath yesterday. I looked at the rankings of America's undergraduate entrepreneurship programs, which is done by Princeton Review. So it's a highly reputed, they do all sorts of educational programs all around the world, or US. And there's a whole range of metrics for working out who's got the best entrepreneurship education program. Does anyone want to have a guess at what metric doesn't feature at all, in any way at all, in evaluating those programs? No, they don't have the confidence, no. How many businesses? No, they have that. They definitely have how many businesses? Sorry? No, they don't have that. But think about something that you would think should be absolutely essential. So this is... Money. Which one? Money? No, they have that. They have how much money you're putting into the ecosystem and how much money was raised. Self-awareness. No, they don't get that far. So the things like failure and self-awareness, those things, they're sort of captured under one more sort of broader terminology. So best entrepreneurship education program in America. What do you think would be fundamental front and centre in trying to work out how we would evaluate these programs? Sorry? Yeah, but what does that come in? What captures reflection? Yeah, and captures all of that. I'll give this to Kath and she can forward on to you guys. Learning. Not one metric even remotely related to learning. Now, if you look at medical education and you ask yourself, how do we evaluate what's the best medical education program in America? The primary focus in the weighting is the average GPA of the class, right? We've got an external bunch of metrics that we've got to meet. Students have to be competent against these things. And this is a good score because the general GPA of the cohort is here. You know, people overall learn very well against those required standards. How about that, eh? Evaluation of an entrepreneurship undergraduate program and no metrics for learning. None. None. And you can't say that someone starting a business in 10 years' time is directly linked to learning. That would be about the closest bow that you could draw. The rest of them is how much money did you put in, how many units have you got, what experience have your staff got, how many business plan competitions do you fund, and all of those factors, but nothing to do with learning. So our friend in Sweden, Martin Lakajas, who many of you would be familiar with, he tells us that the government is taking the money out of entrepreneurship education, that they've had enough, haven't been able to prove our worth. And my passion for standing and being here with you today is to say that if we want to receive support from all different sources to provide entrepreneurship education and enterprise learning at different levels, then we have to actually work out, and I know Andy's doing a lot of work in this area in terms of neuroscience, what actually is it, the change that's required in students to enable them to be effective in this particular domain. And therefore, what is it that we as educators need to be focused on? We've got the big focus at the moment on competencies, and that's fantastic. I'm very supportive of that. But what does it actually take to develop the competencies? Right? What are the nuts and bolts that sit underneath all of that? And so how do we tackle that? Right? So that's my little how-to. My little how-to was when you've got your class and you want to get them excited, get them to toss a coin. I generally have 300 in my class, and in the first class someone walks away with $300. So I'm still a bit dirty on the 35, Kath. I'm just making note of that. I told everyone to get up, Andy, and I said, you know, even if you've only got a 10p in your pocket, there's a fair few people in the room, right? They all had a crack at it, and the winner got 35p. Something's wrong. Something's not right. I'll leave Andy to sort of solve through that. So for me, I've come to settle that I think I can't go beyond phronesis as the outcome that I want to work on. All of the competencies that Ellen and everybody else is out there working around and trying to develop support for and get embedded, they all end up there, right? If you use all of Ellen's competencies, we would have a student, hopefully, that is capable of practical wisdom, right? So I'm sort of settling on that and saying, I don't think in the next 10 to 15 years, while I'm hanging around this space, I'm going to be able to better that as the outcome. So what is it when I work backwards that the focus needs to be on? And for me at the moment, it's a student who has genuine self-awareness through having developed the schemas around that process of reflection and sense-making, their ability to cope with complexity and to be able to ask themselves a series of automated questions from their own mind to be able to work their way through and then increase the probability that their decision-making might be more accurate. I just want to quickly, in the spirit of the 11th for the 11th, I just wanted to introduce this guy so that I don't forget to get off here. Now I've got to give you a 5-minute story about this, unless we go early. We can always have a question. So this is my great-grandfather's, who was an American Indian. This is his son, who was killed in the First World War. He's buried in France, in Susan's cemetery, which is a very, very large cemetery over there for us. So I thought I'd have him up here. That way I can't forget. Kath only asked me to be first because she wanted me to get off by 11, right? So I know what her strategy is. She didn't want me to go on and on. So we've got about 5 minutes, and then we'll have our minute silence. So any questions, guys?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Could we please put our hands together for Professor Colin Jones? Okay,